afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to the House of Lords on this very, very chilly January afternoon. Can you please welcome your host for this afternoon, the Lord Finkelstein. Thank you.
Well, welcome to you all. I'm delighted to welcome so many friends here, so many parliamentary colleagues as well. This is an extraordinary occasion, and it's my privilege to do it because it's my privilege to be associated with this book, with The Long Night, with Ernst Bornstein's incredible story. Naomi's going to talk to you in a minute, so I don't want to say what she is going to say. All I will tell you is this: that when I read the memoir for the first time, I realised that what I was writing was something that had been written to tell the truth. It hadn't been written as a book so much as a piece of literature, but as to tell the truth. And it makes a great book and a great piece of literature because of that. And anybody who has the opportunity to read it, I hope you take that opportunity. But all of us here, I think, are privileged to have a chance to celebrate the life of an extraordinary person and also his extraordinary experiences, and to say, here we are, we are proof that the long night comes to an end, that there is a dawn, and that we are happy to live in it, and that we do so free because of the strength and because of the truth-telling of people like Ernst Bornstein. So I am privileged to be the host of it, but I'm now going to introduce you to Karen Pollock. Many of you will know of the Holocaust Educational Trust, who's done so much to make this day possible, as she does always to promote this very important work.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for hosting our reception today. Thank you, Sajid, for joining us, who we'll hear from shortly. And thank you, I hope you don't mind if I just thank all of my team at the Holocaust Educational Trust, not just for organising today's event, but for the work that they do all year round. And of course, thank you all for joining us today. We're delighted to have so many members of Parliament, members of the House of Lords and the Commons from across the House. We really appreciate your support. And I know you've had numerous emails from me, but just to remind you, the Book of Commitment for members of Parliament to sign is by the Chamber Monday to Thursday next week, 2 till 4. And for the Lords in the Royal Gallery next Wednesday, I believe. Yeah, I'm just checking that one with Sammy. Yeah, 1 till 4. We are here first and foremost because of the brave men and women who shared their most painful stories, and that includes Noemi's parents, her father, the late Dr. Ernst Bornstein, who we'll hear more about soon, and about her mother, Renee, who herself was hidden as a child in occupied Europe and is also here today. At the Trust, we're very fortunate to consider the survivors that we work with our friends, and in fact more than that, our extended family. At this time of year, none of us can help but be reminded of their incredible strength and courage. However many times I've heard their testimony, and however much I must know by now, having done this for quite a while, I can't fail to be moved by the most devastating memories that they carry with them. On Sunday, like possibly many of you here, I watched the Antiques Roadshow, for me the first time, and it hit home even more. Because people were there showing artifacts that they'd carried with them before the Holocaust, if they'd come here as refugees, during or after. And there was one story that really struck me. It was a story from Sybil, the widow of a survivor, Joe. She told how Joe's younger sister had been deported, and so he handed himself in to the Nazis, found out where she'd been taken, and presented himself at the concentration camp. He wanted to protect his sister. He was 17. Before the war, he'd been interested in boxing, and so in Auschwitz he boxed for the Nazis for an extra ration of bread that he could give to his sister. It's unimaginable, really. A young man, a teenager, living in horrific squalor, overcrowded and unheated barracks designed for 52 horses, but holding 500 human beings, with barely any food or sanitation, only a thin pair of striped pajamas in freezing temperature, living in these conditions, putting himself in danger for one extra piece of bread and giving it away. But his sister got ill and died, age 16, and he had to find the strength to keep going. He was liberated wearing his camp uniform, the infamous blue and white striped pajamas that are so familiar to us all. He kept the trousers because, as his wife said, he felt they were a part of him. The trousers he wore every day and every night, that he worked in and stood in the roll call, slept in for months on end, that he boxed in to earn the extra piece of bread, these were a part of him. His wife recalled that after he was liberated, he'd wake up at night screaming, remembering the horrors in his nightmares. But he kept the trousers. And after he died, his widow decided to donate them to a museum. But after a few weeks, feeling she'd betrayed her husband, feeling she'd given away a part of him, she asked for them back. The trousers were part of him because the Holocaust was part of him. He built a new life here, he married, had children and grandchildren, but his wife showed a picture of the family, 22 people, one survived. So for the survivors, including many in this room, the Holocaust isn't something that happened in history. It's not just a lesson in a classroom or a page in a textbook. It's something they live with every day of their lives. And it's something many of them stand up and speak about in front of hundreds of people at a time, reliving the most painful memories, to ensure that what happened to them, their families, and the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were murdered are not forgotten. And that's why we do what we do, because like Joe, this is a part of them, and as members of the human race, it's a part of all of us. We all have a duty to remember. So the Holocaust Educational Trust works in schools and colleges across the country, making sure that students from all backgrounds know what happened. Over 100,000 young people hear a testimony. The urgency of the Vital programme has been brought into sharp focus in the last few weeks. We lost Jack Hagan, the last British survivor of the Bielski partisans, just at the end of last year. And just 2 weeks ago, we lost Otto Deutsch, who'd come to the UK on the Kindertransport, the sole survivor of his family. They dedicated their lives sharing their stories. And we know there'll be a time when human links to the past won't be with us. And it will be down to us in this room and students across the country, future generations, to make sure the Holocaust remains relevant. So we train thousands of teachers reaching the next generation. We take over 3,000 young people to visit Auschwitz and see the site where 1.1 million Jewish people were murdered through our Lessons from Auschwitz project. In doing so, these young people feel empowered to take a stand in today's world and become our ambassadors, many of whom are in the room. And when they hear from survivors, the Holocaust becomes a part of them too. And Noemi is part of that. The Holocaust is a part of her. Her mother and her father were both survivors. Her father wrote his memoirs in 1967. And I think it's sometimes easy to forget this. But in 1967, people didn't talk about the Holocaust in the way that they do now. Survivors didn't share their stories publicly. What he did was incredibly brave, speaking out at a time when the world wanted to move on and forget about the past. Sadly, Ernest died in 1978. Noemi has dedicated the last few years of her life to translating and sharing her father's story, a deeply personal process and a labour of love. Noemi is a force of nature. If any of you here know her, I'm sure you'll agree with me there. Absolutely dedicated to keeping her father's memory alive. As many of us in the room know, this dedication will be even more important in the coming years. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for us at the Trust to be helping launch this book. Please welcome Noemi Lopian.
A hard act to follow. Lord Daniel without any papers, Karen so fluidly. I will start off by thanking the Almighty for bringing you all here today. We're very grateful to the UK for living in freedom and peace. With time on my hands, I'd like to thank each and every one of you by name for joining me. It means so much, your super efforts. I thank you all full-heartedly. By now, my father, with his innate charm, smile and savoir-faire, would have already said hello to each of you. But I am still aspiring, and hope to do so perhaps before the afternoon is over. My honoured survivors, my ladies, my lords, Rabbonim, right honourable ladies and gentlemen, family, friends, Mama. I cannot start the launch without giving a huge thank you to you, Lord Daniel, for the super venue today in the House of Lords, and also for your wonderful foreword, Lord Daniel, in the long night. You have opened gates, not doors. Mr. Andrew Heller, who's helped in every way you could and can, thank you. The unique, amazing Karen Pollock, synonymous with HET, the Holocaust Education Trust, and her formidable team, Alicia, Shoshana, Sammy and Kirsty. I thank you for helping me to organise the launch of the long night with good grace, patience, efficiency and humour. My father would, as I'm sure the survivors present with us today, give a massive grateful thank you to the Trust for your impressive work in Holocaust education and commemoration throughout the UK. Your work is invaluable. It goes without saying that I must bring also to your attention Ruth Ann Lenger, who is not well today, but Arthur Chapman, who's here with us, who are both Holocaust educators and lecturers par excellence from the University College London. You are both inspirational, and I'm grateful for your work and efforts. A very warm welcome to Olivia Marks Waldman. Olivia, I've not stopped talking about the moving HMD commemoration 2016. You simply get it. Chief Police Commissioner, Vice Chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, Mr. Martin Hewitt, I welcome you with open arms and thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. The Right Honourable Sajid, I thank you for your time, but also your pathos and passion in bringing, as you say, the people together. Thank you very much. And to my father's fellow survivors, I promise you, and before I finish, I'm sure all those present will join me in my effort to continue to educate and to commemorate. Remember. My dear mother, herself a survivor, my sister-in-law, brother-in-law, husband and children, I thank you for your continued love. I have a request of you all. Karen told you I'm a bit bombastic. When you leave the event today, do join me, be it at work or at home, to enlighten those around you about the fate of the Jewish people between 39 and 45. A fate, a murder, of a people that occurred for one reason and one alone, Jewish. My father was encouraged during his studies by his professor of neurology to write The Long Night, which he likens to Dostoevsky's memoir From the House of the Dead. My father's introduction, he says, under Nazi terror, the psyche of man was completely changed and totally lost. Under Nazi terror, humankind descended step by step into inhumanity as the natural feelings of man were systematically destroyed. One of my father's most personal reasons for writing, even though he was plagued by nightmares, was, and I will quote from his intro, "How often do I myself hear, especially in the evening when I'm on my own, my parents and sisters speak. I see their faces, which often appear calm and contented. However, when suddenly my little brother comes, a ghostly turmoil rises to my mind. I see myself again as someone drags me from our flat. I hear the screams of my relatives, and I think that they also screamed like that in the gas chambers. I see only my father as a quiet, silent man with a serious appearance, as he says to mother and the children, 'One shall meet the murderers with calm. With pride one shall exit this world. The murderers will get their punishment.' My surviving sister told me that those were my father's words on their arrival at Auschwitz." My father continues, "I will continue to write, because my little brother's voice is still ringing in my ears, because you were suffocated. You with your happy heart, with your serious child's eyes with which you watched over my shoulder as I was reading. For you, dear brother, with your innocent eyes which were barbarically extinguished in Auschwitz. You look at me in the darkness when I lie awake, and your eyes warn me, don't forget. For you, I will have sleepless nights. For you, I will tell the story of the long, bloody night." Post-war, my father spoke yearly in Dachau, which he founded with his best friend Izzy Rosenberg. to tell people about the true events: murders, killings, shootings, beatings, clubbings, stampedes, burning alive, drowning alive, gassing, all done to men, women and children. This to a people that were well integrated, many fully assimilated, and were great contributors to society. A people that made up a very small percentage of society as a whole. Hitler and his immediate associates, many of them great intellectuals, were very successful in their propaganda against Jews. What we call then, and now, anti-Semitism, blaming and denigrating Jews. The murder of a people simply because of their faith occurred at a time when morals, ethics and church were law of the land. It wasn't a question of being there, the wrong time, the wrong place, nor was there any wrongdoing. Simply one, and one reason alone: they were Jewish. Many a German Jew could not and would not comprehend Hitler's plan of extermination. They fought proudly in World War I. They too were taken to Auschwitz, where they were gassed and burned. I would like to share with you my father's last speech in Dachau in 1978, a few months prior to his death. Listen carefully, because this speech in its entirety is totally transferable today, but I will only quote a small part of it. Even those who included socialism in their political agenda would like to forget that time, the time when Jews were persecuted. For how else could it be possible that not far from here, groups under the mantle of social democracy are turning a blind eye to anti-Semitism and ignoring it? We, the survivors, are still witness to recent history. Regrettably, to date, there is little in the way of protest in this country. The SPD remains silent. But the path from ignorance and wanting to forget towards the falsification of history is a short one. Already we notice the emergence of many groups, large and small, who claim in their pamphlets that Dachau was not a concentration camp at all, and that the extermination of European Jewry was nothing but a horror story invented by the Allies. The more time goes by, the stronger the temptation to wipe out the memory and falsify history. How does my father feel about commemoration? He says, because it takes superhuman force to express what our victims of Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, Buchenwald suffered. On Memorial Day, one would need the strength to visit the numerous camps, where roll call took place for hours on end, and stand silently. Stand silently in order to express one's pain, one's silent cry of protest. Because, he says, only in the deepest depth of silence can we hear the cries of torment which fell on the world's deaf ears. 6 million. I challenge any of you in the room today to picture that number. Larger than the whole of Scotland, which has 5.3 million inhabitants. Truly too big to grasp. The different levels of atrocity and malheur that Hitler brought to a people, from being forced to flee one's home, with or without one's loved ones, separation from familiarity and families, parents from children, children from parents. Those children that years later were lucky to be reunited often lost the bond they had before. Imagine, for example, having to flee from elegant Vienna to Shanghai. The huge difference, the language, the culture, the living accommodation, far, far away from home, yet they were the lucky ones. Thanks to Consul Ho Fengchang, who in Vienna in the summer of 1938 issued visas acting against the orders of his superiors, he saved over 2,000 lives. Nowhere nearer to run, you might ask. At the Evian Conference in 1938, attended by representatives from 32 countries, as well as 24 voluntary organizations as observers, plus 200 international journalists, only 2 countries, Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic, increased their quotas of accepting the Jewish people. Hitler went as far as Guernsey, Greece, Morocco, and more, and even demanded of the Japanese in China to incarcerate the Jews in concentration camps. The Japanese refused and put them in a ghetto. Man is capable of making choices. To this day, man practices good and evil. Both, it seems to me, giving great satisfaction, both to great affect and effect. We are reminded of the well-known saying of the 20th century philosopher Santayana: those who forget their past have to relive it one more time. Dr. Ernst Israel Bornstein, my father, finishes The Long Night by saying, on the 30th of April 1945, our freedom was restored. But still today, as these memories are recorded, the mental shock of the concentration camps remains. The camps still hold me prisoner. Let me end, my dear patient friends, by telling you what I was asked in a recent interview for a BBC programme, Inside Out. If you had to leave home, they asked me, here in the UK, where would you go? I answered, why should I, a British citizen, have to go? Thank you for listening to me.
That was simply magnificent, and a magnificent tribute to a magnificent book. I think that for all the things that Hitler did, listening to your speech and meeting your family, having read your father's book, Hitler did fail. That you can tell. It's my great privilege to introduce to you Sajid Javid, who has very kindly given of his time. All of you who are in politics know how difficult time is for a Secretary of State to give up. So this shows his sense of priorities, and we've been very lucky, I think, the Jewish people, but also anybody who's determined to spread education about the Holocaust, to have Sajid in government in this particular office as well, because he has been such a magnificent champion, and his commitment in coming today to celebrate this truly remarkable memoir, that's just one example. Sajid Javid.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now, in Danny's foreword to The Long Night, he makes the point that with every Holocaust story, you learn something new. Each time a survivor shares their memories, you gain another perspective on what happened. And whenever you hear from someone who was actually there, you're reminded, once again, of the human lives that lie behind the cold, hard statistics that are the Shoah. Now, as an MP and as a minister, I've been privileged to meet with several men and women who lived through the Holocaust. I've had the honor of hearing their testimony firsthand. Thanks to Karen and everyone at the Holocaust Educational Trust, 100,000 young people a year can say the same. But it's now more than 70 years since the camps were liberated. Time, inevitably, takes its toll on the brave, strong men and women who survived the Third Reich. That's why it's never been more important to listen to them and to learn from them now. And that's why I'm so pleased to be here today to help see the English edition of Ernst Bornstein's incredible story. Not just because it's an amazing piece of writing, which it undoubtedly is, but because The Long Night contains a number of lessons that all of us would do well to reflect on, both today and in the future. The first is the way the full horror of the Holocaust unfolds, only slowly. It creeps up on you. The first time Bornstein encounters Nazi soldiers, they're chatting to civilians and handing chocolates to children. He describes the first labor camp is relatively humane, but as the book goes on, the situation gradually gets worse. Conditions deteriorate, rations decline, brutality increases. Death, initially a rare occurrence that provokes great shock, becomes routine. And almost before you know it, you're reading this horrific, vivid, deeply disturbing account of death marches. It's a reminder that the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. The Holocaust began when anti-Semitism was legitimized. It began when hatred and bigotry were allowed to grow without challenge, when low-level violence and discrimination against Jews was tolerated and then encouraged. And that's a lesson that is so important today. Last year, the Community Security Trust reported an alarming increase in anti-Semitic incidents. In the summer, there was a worrying spike in levels of hate crime more generally. It's easy to dismiss and just say these are some isolated cases. But the Holocaust shows the danger of letting intolerance take root, of normalizing bigotry. Left unchecked, hatred quickly snowballs and can lead to truly horrific acts. But it's not enough to simply tell ourselves that we disapprove. We have to stand up and take action. Which brings me to the second lesson I took from the long night. We often look at the Holocaust through the stories of individual survivors and victims. But this book reminds us that it's not just the victims who were people, the perpetrators were too. Too often, they're dismissed as some vast, faceless machine. Doing so diminishes their guilt. And that's not something Bornstein allows. He paints a vivid picture of named capos and block elders, of specific SS men and camp guards, each with their own character, their own face, and their own story. Then there are the bystanders, passengers on comfortable trains who turn away their faces, the farmer who refuses to offer sanctuary or even a scrap of food to fleeing prisoners, and the crowds of worshippers who file out of church on a Sunday morning studiously ignore the column of human misery that is marching right past them. Supposedly, these are good Christian men and women. In Bornstein's word, he says, "They calmly surveyed our misery and with hardened hearts observed us like statisticians contemplating criminals." The Holocaust would not have happened were it not for a relatively few evil people. But it could not have happened without millions of ordinary men and women choosing to look the other way. Remembering the complicity of the bystander is particularly important right now. Because the blunt truth is that hate crime is not committed and permitted by faceless others. It's down to people. People like you and me. I've talked before about the insidious way anti-Semitism has made a comeback in politics and polite society. But if only the reaction is to tell ourselves how awful this is, then we're not just failing the victims. We're failing in a fundamental moral duty to society. We have to call out bigotry and racism whenever we see it, wherever we see it. We have to object when a line is crossed from legitimate debate to smears and to abuse. We have to push back when people lazily reach for glib comparisons that belittle what happened, calling those we disagree with Nazis or claiming someone's actions are just like the Holocaust. Ultimately, we must be prepared to do that most un-British of things. We must make a scene. Maybe that's in private. Maybe it's on the media. Maybe it's on Twitter. In fact, it could be anywhere, the top deck of a bus or right here in Parliament. What's certain is that if we don't speak out against hatred and anti-Semitism, it will become normalized. It will become part of everyday life. And once that happens, the consequences once again would be tragic. But I'm hopeful. I look around this room and I see people who are willing and able to take a stand. I see organizations like the Holocaust Educational Trust that are spreading the word. I see the 15 ambassadors, many of them I've met before, amazing young people who have volunteered to make sure survivors' stories are shared with their peers. It reminds me that the most people are fundamentally good at heart, even if they need a little nudge down there. That's why the third message I took from Bornstein's testimony is a message of hope. First, in the fact that throughout his time in the camps and in the years that followed, Bornstein simply refused to be beaten. He was determined to fight on, to see justice done, to ensure that the crimes committed against his family were not forgotten. That in itself I find very inspiring. But I'm also struck by the many acts of kindness he describes. The nameless farm girl who offers a starving Bornstein some bread. Meister Hermann, the electrician who takes Bornstein under his wing. The fellow inmate at Flossenburg who risks his own life to save the author from certain death. Together, this shows that even in the darkest, longest of nights, light can shine through only if we choose to let it. There's a small Holocaust memorial established by Ernst Bornstein. I think it's in Dachau. The inscription simply reads, "To honor the dead and to warn the living." The long night does exactly that. Noemi, I can't thank you enough for bringing your father's words to a new audience and to a new generation. I know it wasn't easy, but as first-hand memories of the Holocaust begin to fade, his painful testimony becomes more important than ever. And it's more important than ever that we need this warning and that we learn from it. That's why I'm so proud to be overseeing the work on the new National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre that's being built just a short walk from where we are right now. It will help ensure that the people of this country never forget the horrors of the past and remind us all of the need to resist bigotry in all its forms. Dr. Ernst Israel Bornstein was strong enough to survive years of abuse at the hands of racists and anti-Semites. Surely in 2017 we can be strong enough to stand up and speak out in the face of such hatred. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think there's much more I can say after what was an incredibly powerful speech from Sajid, and we can't thank you enough for that intervention. I think many people here would be quite comfortable making a scene, but I think in this case, I think it really gives us the impetus to say and speak out when we do see injustice. Also to thank Noemi for everything. You have your drive and passion absolutely inspires my team and me, and we appreciate it's true. We appreciate you coming to us and being able to hold this event. And thank you, and obviously for your incredible words. And just finally, to thank Lord Danny Finkelstein, who has kindly hosted this and been such a great support for us. So thank you all for being here. Please stay, enjoy, and speak to each other. Thank you.